There we go. I believe we're live. Fantastic. Okay. Well, good evening, good morning, everyone around the world. I'm the book guy, and I'm here today chatting with Michael R. Miller, self-published indie author of The Dragon's Blade and Songs of Chaos. So welcome, Michael.
Hello. It's great to be here.
Yeah, very excited, actually. So Michael and I have chatted a lot by email. It's very nice to actually hear the accent in person and to get the full experience.
Not too thick, I hope.
No, it's fine, actually. Look, honestly, we're Australian. I think we get a lot of British TV, so I'm pretty familiar with the accent. Okay. I don't think we get, maybe Americans don't get as much of it, I think.
I went to university in St Andrews in Scotland, and a huge percentage of the students there are Americans, so I had to learn to slow down a little bit. Because from where I'm from on the West Coast, it's sort of like west of Glasgow, people do talk a lot faster, and we tend to like slur the vowels a little bit, crush them, and like roll the R's, and it all gets a bit. So if you're not used to it, it just sounds like gobbledygook. So I learned to kind of slow it down a bit. And then the same when I moved down to London, you know, British people can understand you, but there's so many folks in London who are from all over the world, and they can't keep up if you talk in your natural speed and accent. So yeah, it's a little toned down, but give me a few whiskies and get me a bit angry, and it will come right back.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I'm as an Australian, I think I hate just about every Australian accent I've ever heard on film.
Really?
It's almost always terrible.
From other actors that aren't Australian, like trying to do the accent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always excited whenever I see like Hugh Jackman or Chris Hemsworth, for example. They always have like a very natural sounding Australian accent. But whenever someone puts it on, I think they do it like the Crocodile Hunter, if you're familiar with him. And he was one of a kind, you know? We love him, but yeah, one of a kind.
Yeah. It's similar with Scottish accents. Like even actors who are Scottish, it sounds like it's more intense when they're being filmed. I don't know if that's just because in comparison to other people around them, or I'm less used to it because I've been away for a while. But yeah, it sounds like a little more intense on film than it actually does in real life, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so.
It was funny though. I'm watching like, oh God, what were those Netflix films with Chris Hemsworth, the action ones? Extraction. Watching those Extraction movies. Because he's allowed to just speak in his regular voice. Like I've heard him in so many movies where he's doing either British or an American accent, and then suddenly he just sounds like himself. It was it was a bit of a shock. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, look, I'll start going through some questions, and just to give you a brief idea. So we'll talk a little bit about yourself. Then we'll go to Dragon's Blade, talk about some indie publishing, and then Songs of Chaos sort of thing. So there's a semi chronological order to it in a way, but feel free to just break the order as much as you want, mate. We're pretty flexible. Sure. And yeah, and we'll go from there. All right, so obviously our first question is what got you started in writing? Where did it all begin?
It all began, I think, when I saw Fellowship of the Ring in the cinema at age, I want to say I was 9. It was 9 or something like that. That was because it came out in 2001, I think. Born in 92, so
yeah.
I was 9 or very close to 10, but quite young. Saw that, and like it was just, my mind was blown, and that was like a little golden age. We had like Lord of the Rings movies come out, and I started to read those books. We had Harry Potter, that was massive. We had the Star Wars prequels, which whatever you think of them, like they were a bit more beloved, let's say, than the sequels have been. There was some great video games of that stuff. There was just a lot of great fantasy, sci-fi, epic stuff happening in the early 2000s. But yeah, really, it was Fellowship of the Ring in the cinema that really just got me kind of hooked for life. And I don't know where the notion came from. I think I just had the idea for what became Dragon's Blade bubbling away in my head, sort of ever since I was really young, ever since either that day or when I was about 10 or 11. Like that was this thing that was always in my head, like percolating for a long, long time. But I never really took it seriously, just because at school you don't do any creative writing. No one teaches it. Not at all. It's all frowned upon. No one really even teaches you how to write well, even just for an academic sense. Like you're just told to go off and do essays, but no one ever actually teaches you how to write better. write well. It's like,
Yep.
you know what I mean? Like we were talking about just before the call, those Brandon Sanderson lectures. And I think when I found them online for the first time, that was the first time someone was giving examples of how you improve a sentence, how you improve prose, which would be useful, whether it's fiction or, professional or academic. But no one really teaches that at school. I'm sure they will do some places, but I think generally there's just too much focus on, literary criticism or some things like that, which when you're 14, you don't really care about so much. You go through
That's
that.
very true.
Yeah. So I was going through that. It was like at the back of my head, like a little pipe dream, but I never really took it seriously. Even for university, I didn't take it super seriously. I did history at uni, and if you do history at uni, at the end of it, you always get the same question, which is, so you're going to become a teacher? It's like, no, don't want to be a teacher. I decided I would try to do law because that's another thing that people go off to do. So I came down to London to start a conversion course, which is like rather than doing the degree in 3 years, you do it in 1 year. So it's super compact, super condensed, super brutal, very unpleasant. And about midway through that, I basically had a breakdown and a quarter life crisis. And I decided I wanted to write books. That's all I'd always wanted to do. I had to do it. And so I just threw myself into writing what became the first book of Dragon's Blade. I had bits and pieces. I had some chapters. I had some ideas, others lying about, but I threw myself into it then. As my way to try and get out of what I saw as a life I didn't want to do.
That speaks to me. Hey, I mean, for one, I think what you said about like people learn how to write in high school, it's very true. If you ever read a lot of people who've started writing for the very first time, or people who like write emails in a corporate world, they have this like strange formality to their language, and it doesn't sound like the way people speak at all. It's like they've learned to write from high school, and it sounds unnatural, and you don't quite learn how to go beyond that. It's very true, and you're right. I think sorry, just tangenting, but like I learned, I did a professional writing degree. Like that was my university course. It was a fine arts degree, and everyone was like, "Oh, so when are you going to teach English?"
Right. Yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
No, writer. And they're like, no, you're going to be a teacher eventually. When will you drop the dream and go be a teacher?
You'll write your book on the side. That's.
No, that's exciting. Well, I'll keep going.
Well, that's interesting, actually, that you did a creative writing degree. Was the whole degree specifically on creative writing then, just on the entire thing? Like,
it was technically an arts degree, and it had professional writing and creative writing. So we learned how to write persuasive arguments. We learned how to write political speeches or food reviews. So there's a whole bunch of like random stuff to try to give you an opportunity to do something.
Yeah.
But a lot of us were just there because we wanted to write novels, and we were just like, where's the creative stuff? Because you'd have like one subject a semester.
For that. Yes.
Yeah. But overall,
you'll be ahead. You'll be ahead of the game then.
I hope so. Honestly, I had to unlearn a lot of it before I actually started writing.
Really?
A lot of what they sort of teach, even at a university level, is how to write literary fiction, not fiction that will actually sell books and make money.
So what's the difference? Because of it, I mean, the difference in terms of literary fiction being its own genre, where it's a lot of middle-aged professors in a rainy setting, drinking tea and contemplating life sort of stuff. But like, what is, in terms of how they teach you to write it, like literally the prose, is that different somehow? Like they want you to do differences? I don't know what. I'm curious as to what that is.
A lot of it was about having really clever sentences. So the sentences could be really long, really poetic, and it was about making each word impactful, but it wasn't about overall clarity. So I think when you're reading a regular novel, it's about get to the point in a quick and exciting way, because you're an orator, you're telling a story, you're entertaining. And in literary, it was less about the entertainment factor and more about the beauty of the art itself.
Right. So it was more stained glass as opposed to the stained glass approach as opposed to the clear window approach?
Yes, very much so. Yeah. But I was going to ask, so how old were you when you first began book one? Is that The Reborn King?
Yes. Yeah. Book one.
Because in my head, it's always Dragon's Blade. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's just because I it's a strange naming convention because it was just always in my head was the Dragon's Blade was the kind of series, and then I realized I had to name each book, and it's still in my head. Just that's why I think in some ways it was meant to be one massive combined trilogy unit in some ways. Like it's just always been that way. Yeah. So the first book was called The Reborn King. When did I start writing that? Is what you're asking?
Yeah. Well, because I think you mentioned that you started it young as a teenager, and then you revisited when you were ready to try write it.
Yeah. So what I started, I must have had like dozens of opening chapters of that. As you say, like since I was a young teenager through, but I never really got very far because I wasn't taking it super seriously. And I think a lot of people find you can do a few chapters quite quickly, and then you hit a slightly muddier point. There's always a point early in a book where you think it's rolling really easily because it's sort of easier to start in some ways, and then you hit a point where you have to push through the middle to actually get to the end. So I had dozens and dozens of different variations. I mean, the ideas were kind of crazy. It went off into weird sci-fi elements at some point. The only things that ever really stuck together was the name of the main character, Danyur, the fact that he had this magic sword called the Dragon's Blade, and how it looked and what it could do, and a couple of other things around that, and the fact that he would be reborn and stuff like that. But so much else changed, but that core remained.
Nice.
I think I must have had about 6 or 7 chapters written in quote, badly written when I kind of decided to throw myself in and actually finish the thing. But they were so bad, they were so bad. They needed a lot of work, and even, and the first book, the version that you read now in the trilogy and the version of book 1 that is live is an updated version from the first one that got published. So the first version that got published was in late 2015. And then in 2018, when I completed the series, I wanted to box set it later that year, but I went back to book 1 and heavily edited and rewrote bits of it with the benefit of having finished the series and had a bit more experience. So I could improve it. I mean, you couldn't improve it too radically because in some sense it's there, but I really polished it up. I kind of made it better than it was, let's say, as much as I could. And I think that was partly what helped the box set succeed more so than each book individually did, because it was just a little bit easier to get in. Book 1 wasn't going to be such a stumbling block. It was one of the best decisions I ever did to go back and actually do all that work. A lot of people were saying, don't do that, just put the box set out, write something next, put another book out and move on. But I was like, no, I want to do this. It wouldn't take, because like when you've already got the book there, like going through it and polishing it and re-editing it and stuff like that doesn't take anywhere near as long as writing it in the first place. At least for me, I can be a slow drafter, but a very quick editor and rewriter. So that was the best decision I ever made. I think that's what helped. I think that's what really gave me the chance to get the break eventually with the box set.
That's really cool because I understand.
So your question was, what age was I? I must have been 20. Yeah. It was 2014. I must have been. I think I was. Yeah, I was either 21. I was 22 when I was writing it, and I think I might have just been 23 when it published. But yeah, something like that. Pretty young.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, so that's something you can do when you're an indie author is you can kind of you can edit and make changes to stuff that you've technically published already. But I think traditional published, once it's out, right? It's untouchable.
Once it's out, it's out. Unless you're talking and you rewrite bits of The Hobbit, right? But yeah, once it's out, it's out. I mean, even, famously, people will say, oh, there's all these mistakes in this famous book, and to this day they're still being printed with those typos, and it's like, yeah, oftentimes even those get fixed. And although I have a tiny bit more sympathy for that now, because as I've gone on, the number of files I've had to make and remake and redo for changing formats and all the rest of it, after a while you start to lose track of which format file is the most up-to-date one, and it's hard. I have a little more sympathy for typos for slipping through, but yeah. Generally speaking, once it's out with traditional. And with indie, you can make changes. The thing about that is it's really easy to change an ebook. It's really easy to change a print book because you just switch out a file. It's really easy. But if you've recorded the audiobook, that's pretty set. Like you can You could get files re-recorded. In fact, we did that for Dragon's Blade for the first book. You can do that. You can get individual chapters re-recorded and stuff like this, but that's going to cost you again because you're doing the whole process again, and so that's a much more difficult proposition to do. So generally, if you've got everything out, including the audio, you're probably done.
I had another question. So it's a general question of what made you pick that idea to commit to and turn into a book? Because I know a lot of authors, or like people who want to be authors, they often have many ideas, and they're all sort of, they might start one and be like, oh no, don't like that, and change and go write that one. What made you pick the one idea for the Dragon's Blade?
So it's an easy answer because I'm a kind of weird author in that I don't have a million ideas bombarding me all the time. I tend to get the idea that sticks in there, and then that's the one I'm focusing on, and that's generally where I focus all my attention until it's done. So like with Dragon's Blade, I didn't have a clue what was coming after that. Once I finished Dragon's Blade, then I started to think about what came next, and so on. Right now, when I'm writing Songs of Chaos, I've got one eye on what I will write in the future, but I have already kind of in my head committed to the next idea. It's not like there's 5 or 6 competing ideas. I'm like, no, this is the one. And I'm sort of thinking about that specifically. And then, I don't know, that seems to be how I work. The ideas...
Sounds convenient.
Yeah, so it's a convenience, yeah. And so I don't get distracted by starting different projects and things like that. I really just focus on the one thing at a time.
Great. Well, that's interesting because you said that when you were writing the Dragon's Blade in its very first form, you even had some more sci-fi elements, and you had a couple of different ideas going in there. So I guess what made you pick the ones that you stuck with, the ones about Danur, Reborn, having the magical blade? Why did those ones stand out in particular?
I don't know. It must have just been a gut instinct to be like, you just sort of sniff out. You sort of have a gut instinct that sniffs out where a story is. So like, the fact that Danur starts as someone who we don't necessarily like and who you don't think is going to be a very good leader, who has all these problems, understandable perhaps because of the situation a little bit, but that chance of the rebirth seemed like a slightly more unique take on the whole chosen one-esque trope, and so he gets that chance to be a different person. He gets that second chance, but then you can have the old self come in. It just. I mean, I couldn't have explained it as a 14-year-old, but it has obvious like storytelling. There's a lot that you can do with that. It seems like a good foundation, and I think if you're,
I like that.
Yeah. I think if you're right, the more you write, the more you do it. Yeah, you have a good gut instinct. The more you do it, the more you develop that gut instinct of like, oh, we can explore this conflict there, right? So like kind of finding where the conflict is. So it's like he will be conflicted because he's like two people. He's also the same person. He'll be conflicting not just with the external world, but with himself, which is obviously, this is always a good place to be. So it just seemed, I think I just knew it would be ripe for good storytelling. And everything else around it is kind of building the setting for that to take place in some ways. Like the story is his story, and everything else about the world and everything else about every other character is there to serve that story. So that's, you get your central point of conflict and then roll with it.
Interesting. This is perhaps a tricky question. Now you mentioned that you kind of saw the Dragon's Blade as in many ways being one big story, but I'm curious about how you split the story. So like Dragon's Blade, you split into 3, and Songs of Chaos is looking like it's going to be 5. So how do you know how many books you want to do? I mean, is that something unique to every story? Is that an instinct you developed as well?
It probably is, yeah. I mean, Dragon's Blade just felt like it would be a trilogy because that's your good standard, 3 books, relatively, it's not so large. It's a nice series length. It's a kind of classic length. Dragon's Blade did feel like one large story, but you couldn't write that much and put it into one book necessarily. You want to split it up a bit, and I just sort of did that, Especially starting out, you're not going to write a 400. I think the whole thing together was 440,000 words. So you're not going to put that as one book starting off. Songs of Chaos, by the time I got into writing Ascendant was very like open. It was like, originally that was going to be originally the idea was Ascendant was to make it a much more YA-esque story, for want of a better word, and try to take it with traditional publishing, because my friend Tara Maffer, who's a big YA author, he wanted me to kind of join him, and we could go on tour together and stuff like that. So that was the initial plan. But just as I was writing it, I don't know, I can't, because they wanted to keep it contained to like 90,000 words for those sorts of, they're quite strict on the word count and things like this.
Yep.
Even though if you look at the biggest books that succeed both in YA and in adult, they tend to be longer. But because they would have treated you like a debut, they are very cagey. They want things to be a certain length, and and it got ahead of me. So it went from 90,000 words. It was then 175 when I finished it. It was clearly not purely YA, because just with some of the nuanced stuff, some of the, I guess a little bit of the violence. I don't know how much they would have toned out of that, but it just felt like it wasn't something that the YA publishers would have wanted. It was just my opinion. And by that point, I'd had enough success on my own. I'd had enough audio success on my own as well that I wanted to keep going with it. So this is that was a bit of a tangent, but when I started Ascendant, it was very open-ended. I thought, this could, if it succeeds, maybe I take it longer. If it does okay, maybe I make it a trilogy. I was very much as writing the first book, I wanted to make it feel like a standalone story with potential. So like at the end of Ascendant, like a lot of it does wrap up. There's obviously there is obviously a lot more to come, but they kind of fly off into the sunset, so to speak. And you could, if it never got a sequel for whatever reason, you could kind of be mildly satisfied with how it all wraps up.
Yeah, so I was surprised by how much Ascendant really did close it at the end there. Yeah.
And it's just because I wanted to make sure that it felt satisfying, and then I could see how it did and how it landed, and go from there. And I'm not sure when I knew it would be 5 books, or I think for a while I thought it would be 6 books, but then I was able to condense what was going to be 4 and 5 into what will now be 4, which is going to be a lot stronger than stringing it out. So, and of course, there's 5 magic types and there's 5 elders, and 5 is a very sort of important number in the series. So that just felt poetic. But it could have, it might, if it had flopped, I might have just done a quick trilogy on it or something. I don't know. I kept it open ended just to see how it did. Thankfully, it did well. I mean, even when it first came out, it had an original cover that wasn't quite hitting the mark. It still did well enough that I probably would have extended it out to something like a 5-book series. But when we got the new covers, when it kind of really took off, then I was like, okay, this is great. I've got a nice long series ahead now that hopefully I can with confidence know that each book will keep doing well, and that's a nice place to be.
That's interesting, actually, because Kit wanted me to ask, so do you actually still have a copy of the original Ascendant cover?
Oh, I do. You know what?
Because I didn't realize that there were multiple covers.
We were finally, because I got these shelves recently, I finally got my books out of storage. And I found this. This is like the first proof that I had off of the original cover, because it's got this resale thing on it.
That looks like the same title, cover. Like the same graphic for the name. Actually, that's interesting.
It's not the same. It's actually a different font. Okay. I can't remember what the font name is, but it's a slightly different font. Yeah. I'm trying to get it into the camera, but yeah, you can see that you've got Holt on the back, Ash there, but they see as an image on a computer screen, as a regular JPEG, the image looks really good because it's meant to be a Nightscape battle. It's meant to be the battle at the end of book 1. And you've even got Pyro and Talia on the back. You can't really see them, but they're on the back as well. Which, as an image file, I think it's on my website under like art and cool things. I've got the full, I've got the full image up there. It looks really good on the screen, but when you print it out, it sort of darkens it. And the Amazon product pages, I didn't realize this. They sort of desaturate the images a little bit, and so it just made it too dark. I think it was just too dark, and it just wasn't working. Yeah, I just felt like the reviews coming in were so good. I just felt like, no, I feel like I really nailed this ending. I was like, I feel this should do better. So I made the decision to change the cover, and then we have this nice, really bright, luminous cover. And as soon as I changed that, it was like it relaunched again. It just went flying back up. Yeah. It was again
Fantastic.
one of those decisions that like you wouldn't be able to do as a trad author. Like your cover is your cover, and if you're snookered, you're snookered. So like between being able to re-edit book one, being able to actually make a box set, being able to change the cover on Ascendant, all those decisions have been so key that it's the idea. I mean, I would go trad if it was right. I'm not against it, but I'm just so aware of like things could have gone so badly if I hadn't been able to just take those decisions and make that gamble.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because that cover did not look bad. Like it looked like a good picture, but it didn't fulfill the function it needed to on a business level. That's a really important distinction.
Yeah, and so like a lesson that I took away from that, and also I worked with I founded a digital publisher called Portal Books. I'm no longer involved day to day, but they're still going, and we learned this lesson the hard way that like covers that are a bit dark, they might look like fantastic pieces of artwork. It might suit everything else. It might look really great when you see the full version in high res, but actually when it gets up into that Amazon product page, it just loses a little bit of what made it special. And so I try to now think about covers that have a lot of color, that you can really see a very strong single image on it, that sort of thing. Especially once it's a thumbnail, you just want something that pops, even if it's just a bit of color. Something that pops at the eye. There's always exceptions, because I would say dark covers aren't going to do so well, and then someone will send me some dark covers that sell well, and I'm like, yeah, there's always exceptions, but broadly, I think cover art a little bit brighter, text a little bit bigger, just because of how the product pages work. Yeah.
Sorry, so Kit has a question. For those of you who don't know, my wife Kit is sitting in on the chat and she's moderating comments, and she's actually a book cover designer for a living. Well, it's one of the many skills she has, but she's got a question about it. So,
yeah. So this actually isn't book cover related. Oh, sorry. There we go. Sorry, everyone. This isn't actually book cover related, but I'm really interested to hear more about the concept of having a blind and disabled dragon in a fantasy series, because that is something that I have not seen, no pun intended, in any other books. And I just think it's fantastic to be seeing that kind of physical disability representation in fantasy books.
Yeah. Thanks, sweetheart.
Yeah, thanks. It just seemed like a cool idea. So I was working on the basis of, okay, I want to do a Dragon Rider epic. Okay, the bond's going to be really important, because the whole thing, if that doesn't work, nothing else works. If the kid and the dragon do not like melt your heart, I've failed. And I was much more inspired by How to Train Your Dragon than anything else. Hiccup and Toothless's relationship is so good, and I was thinking why it's so good, and it's so good because they really need each other. Like literally, like Toothless cannot fly without Hiccup. Let's forget that Hiccup was the one that shot him down, that like knocked off his tail wing in the first place. But without his tail wing, he can't fly. Hiccup fixes that, so Toothless needs Hiccup, and Hiccup needs Toothless for all sorts of reasons. And then Hiccup loses his leg, so they have that kind of symmetry of So I was like, okay, so that's the basis, and so it's like, okay, they really need each other. So a sort of similar idea. What would that be? And then this was 2018. Daredevil season 3 was coming out, and I thought I loved Daredevil, and it just got, the dragon could be blind. Dragon could be blind. That would be a really interesting take. I haven't seen that before myself. Fits the world I was sort of building. It means the bond between the characters is going to be really strong and really genuine, because the dragon will really need the kid, which is something that I think can go a bit wonky with Dragon Rider books, where like I just wonder, why do these dragons with all this magic and all this power want a human at all? Like, you think the human is like maybe a pet to them or something, but often it's the human always seems in control, like keeping in mind a little bit. But if it's a dragon, why the heck would you bond with a human? What's in it for you? So the magic system was built out to sort of address that. But with Ash and Hope, it's really like Ash really needs Hope, because the dragons in this world don't normally bond that young. So they come to their bonds a bit older and mature, and they can take care of themselves by that point. But Ash can't. Ash couldn't. He really needed Hope. Hope really needs him. So that's kind of where that kernel started. I just really wanted to make that relationship feel really, really special. And then that was the reason behind it. And I was able to in the writing, and it gave me an opportunity to, dive into some of my own experiences with cystic fibrosis. Like, obviously, that's totally different from being blind. It's not the same at all. But there's a little kernel of just dealing with a condition and living a little differently, and having to make accommodations in your life, and perhaps being ill. Like, for me, it's been more about, in the past, you would just get really sick a lot of the time. Like in 2019, when I was writing Ascendant, I was in the hospital for a total of 2 months because I had really bad chest infections that year. And all that physiotherapy, breathing that you have to do to clear your lungs was, as you pointed out in the video, part of what made the meditation techniques possible. So Ash was blind because I was trying to nail the relationship, and because the other was really cool. But it did allow me that opportunity to kind of seed in a little bit of my own experience. Not so much that it just slaps the reader in the face. Like, you wouldn't know that I have anything from reading the book, but hopefully the authenticity of how Ash feels, and how he feels, when Holt feels kind of guilty about it in some ways. Like, Ash is like, no, it's fine. It's clearly, I'd rather be here than not here, that sort of thing, for sure. And I think that's, and Ash just making the best of it is kind of how I've always taken it as well. Don't let it get you down.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of the story as well, is that Ash, in many ways, has a mentality of, to some extent, like, oh, that there's something wrong with me and I'm not good enough. And it's when he has that network of support from people around him saying, actually, you are a legitimate member of our team. We need you. And there are things that you can do that no one else can do. And helping him find his own sense of self-agency and fulfillment. It's a very inspiring story, and I think it's something that we can all relate to. If we feel different or outcasted in some way, knowing that, like, our lives still matter, who we are still matters, and that we have something unique to offer to the world that is that's beautiful. It's a very hopeful message.
Yeah, I just whatever hand life has dealt you. Some people get dealt crappy cards at poker, and some people get dealt a bad hand. But you have to just play your hand. You have to just try and make the most of it. You just have to. That's the only option, really, because the other options is to wallow and just slide backwards and make things even worse by not just picking it up and striding forward against it. It's just like, it is like the hobbits going up against the Dark Lord. Like, seems like it's a foolish idea, but what other choice do they have? They have to just keep going one step at a time. That's all we can do. Yeah,
it's something I personally try to live by, is the idea that, like, I have one life. I'm not going to waste it wishing it was a different life. I'm going to live the life I have today. I'm going to do my very best with it. Yeah. Well, I'll keep going. I think we're about to talk about indie publishing. You may have touched on this already a little bit, but I do want to ask specifically, what made you decide to go indie in the first place? Was there a specific advantage that stood out to you?
The advantage was just knowing it could happen. So, like I say, had a bit of a breakdown, had a bit of my quarter life crisis, threw myself into writing as my escape valve, hopefully from a life I didn't want to lead. And so the indie route meant that the book would actually happen, because if I'd started to chase the traditional route and try to find an agent and a publisher and everything else, there was absolutely no guarantee that would happen, or that it would happen fast. It would be a slow process if it happened at all. And it was knowing that I could push ahead and make it real. That's what gave me the drive to do it and push through all the pain at that point. If it had been that, if there had been that kind of doubt as to whether it would ever release, then I don't think I could have finished it. I don't think I could have kept going. It was really just that drive to just escape, to just do what I really wanted to do and just push it.
Right. So you needed to know it was going to be real at the end.
Yes. Yeah. I just needed to know that. I wouldn't have, if it had been that I'm going to write this and then see what happens. No, I don't think I would have had the drive to actually complete it at that point, because it was hard. It was hard doing it was hard writing that and completing that very tough course all at the same time. It was, it was the kind of effort level that I could not do now. I just couldn't do it. You can work that hard for so long until you just collapse. I wouldn't be able to work that hard anymore. It was far too much. So
yeah,
you can do that for a little while. So I had to know there was going to be the sort of, at least that the light at the end of the tunnel, to be like, I'll hold it in my hand. It will be real, and I will do my best with it, because I don't mind digging in there, but I like having the control. I've come to really enjoy having the control, and the idea that it's going to be really difficult and things like that. I thought, no, I'll figure it out. I wasn't even thinking about the publishing so much. I was like, I'll figure that out. I'm just going to do it, but I'll do it. Yeah, it just that was it. Yeah, I had to just know it was going to come.
That's great. Well, off the back of that, next question is, how did you learn how to indie publish? Because that is it's a bit of a complex process, and there's a lot of information you need in order to do self-publishing. So where did you learn it? Did you learn by doing and trying?
I think I learned by doing and making a lot of mistakes. Because this is back some years ago, and so there's a lot more information out there now. There's a lot more information that's readily packaged now. There's a lot more people that have succeeded in every genre space that you can look to and ask questions of. I think I just learned by doing, partly some of Brandon Sanderson's lectures touch on it, but they don't really touch on the technicals. But obviously I would have watched those because I consumed all of his lectures at this point, learning and about writing and publishing. Mark Dawson, who is a big name in the indie community because he started up the courses. So like he started packaging up all the knowledge that he and others had built over the years up until then, 2015, 16, into these big courses. I was listening to his podcast. I'm trying to remember the exact timeline. I was definitely listening to his podcast. I was listening to other people talk about stuff, but this still feels like the early days, even though the earliest days of indie publishing was 2010, 2011. So by 2015, 16, that feels almost like midway. But there still wasn't tons out there. But yeah, it was learning by doing, learning by listening to all these people talking about it. And then once you publish, you find indie authors especially. I mean, I think all authors do this. You find a little cluster of your peers that have released around the same time as you, and you learn together and you come up together. And that's even more the case in indie publishing. That you all gather and you all try to figure out what the heck you have to do and what's going on.
Yeah.
So it's like there's that kind of hive mind of knowledge that you can tap into. There's courses out there now. There's a lot more podcasts. There's a lot more information. But it was a lot of just doing it. So someone would say, okay, get the mailing list. These are the platforms. I just got the platform, logged in, and just figured out how to build all the sequencing. Or how you give it away. You use this platform for that. Okay, I'll make an account now. I'll figure it out. There was a lot of that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I just took a note of my own of Mark Dawson to look up later. So well, that's sort of leads into my next question. So how do you market yourself as an indie author? Because that's a complicated question. I think there's many different approaches to that. But how do you specifically yourself? What is your marketing strategy?
I haven't really got a solid strategy because it's been built up in bits and pieces over the years. I've always just kind of put as much energy as I can into making each book as good as I could, and it gets torn away from my cold fingers almost. Like I'm doing only one book a year, and in 2022 I wasn't able to get one out. So also releasing only one a year or one every however many year and a bit. I need that book to be as good as possible because it's just that's my one thing. And I want those books to hopefully sell, not just chasing the algorithm, but I want them to be able to sell for years, hopefully over my entire life. So I'm trying really hard to make every book as good as possible. And that's where almost all the focus goes. And then when it comes to marketing, you really, rather than thinking about how you market you want to just think about how you're marketing the book. So you want to make sure that the cover is spot on. So having just said that my first attempt at the Ascendant cover wasn't perfect, you have to sometimes, have a second attempt at it. But you want to get the best cover you can, a really good title. Just because the title that's been in your head for a long time. That might not be a title that actually evokes what you want in the reader. I can't think of an example of a bad title, and if I did, I probably wouldn't share it. But if the title doesn't evoke an emotional response, like if so if the title has got too much world building terminology in it, it's meaningless. You get some titles you see people being like the blah 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 blah, and it's like it's so specific to their world, but it's like I don't know your world yet, so I have no idea what this word means or what you're talking about. This sort of thing. The night, if it's like the Knights of blah blah blah, meaningless because I don't know what the Knights of blah 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 is. Whereas if you want a title that kind of evokes a sense of a story, a sense of emotion. So with Songs of Chaos, I go for these one-word titles, which are sort of inspired by the Cradle series to an extent, and they're really, really hard. Finding one-word titles is bloody hard, and I kind of hate it. But and I didn't have the title for Ascendant until right up, like really close to launch, right up until we were getting the covers done, formatted and stuff. I eventually just went, we'll just call it Ascendant because that word itself obviously evokes a sense of upward movement. You get a sense of a journey in the word itself, coupled with the artwork of the Dragon Rider stuff. You just know what that book is. You know what that's going to be about. You have to sell the feeling and emotion of your book from the cover and the title, and that's 90%. That is 90% of it. The blurb is then also important, but if the cover and the title aren't working, no one's going to read your blurb. If people are reading the blurb, they're already kind of interested. You'd have to write a blurb that's really confusing to then put them off. And it's the cover and the title that sells it. So you want to make sure that that's all on point, like absolutely bang on. Because it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how much you spend on ads. It doesn't matter how much you put yourself out there. If your book can't evoke that emotion in the reader, it's going to be a really hard sell. Or every step of the way, it's going to be a really hard sell. So how you market, really great cover, really great title, and then a really great blurb. And then after that, everything moves around, everything shifts around really quickly. So a lot of people still like Facebook ads. I think that works if you're in romance or thrillers and crime. I don't think it works so well in our space, epic fantasy. I've seen no evidence of it. I don't know anyone that has found success doing it. I did find audiobook ads on Facebook very good for a while, but that all trailed off. So something that works for a couple of years might be that it works for a bit and then it goes away. Like there was a trend in 2018-19 to do these box sets like I did with Dragon's Blade, where you would put your ebooks into one box set, you would push that out for like 99 cents, and you would then benefit from the Kindle Unlimited money. But Amazon at some point seemed to go, we don't like this, and they started suppressing the ranks that a 99-cent book can achieve. So it used to just be a sale was a sale in the rank, whether it was 99 cents or $9.99. They didn't tell us. They've never made any announcement. They've never given us any information. But it's very clear now that to gain an equivalent rank at 99 cents, you have to get a lot more sales than you used to before. So they've kind of suppressed the ranking mechanism behind that. It's still obviously useful to do a discount just to get some copies out there, right? But you won't get that ranking algorithmic. They really killed that entire method off, right? So this is Amazon. Things change. I know, things change all the time. So but what won't change is if your cover and title and blurb are spot on. If your comparisons are spot on. So all of that has to be your foundation. Everything else is just fluff on top. If that isn't right, nothing will work.
It's cool.
So I'll keep running because we're on the topic. Amazon ads can work. They do work, but they're really hard to scale. And I don't know if it's possible to scale it, because in theory, if you could scale them, you would just scale it all the way into your number one in the store. And no one seems able to do that because they don't scale. What do I mean by scale? So you could tell Amazon to spend $50 a day, let's say, advertising your book or your series. And it doesn't always even spend the $50. Like Facebook spends every penny every day on probably rubbish. Amazon's actually harder. It's a bit more picky. it tends to be better at finding people who will buy it, but it might only spend $20 of that $50. But let's say it's running really hot, it's spending $50, you're seeing lots of sales, your rank's going up, and you're like, oh, that's great. Okay, double the budget, $100 a day. It just goes, nah, I'm going to spend 50. I'm going to spend 20 again. Like, it just won't. Just because you tell it to spend money doesn't mean it's going to spend money. So what I found is that with any book, there will be a kind of sweet spot where you can spend however much at this much of a bid, and it ticks along nicely. But if you start bidding higher or start increasing the budget, nothing seems to happen other than maybe you spend more budget, but you don't get the results. And if you turn it down or off, you start to see, your rank comes down and you stop getting some of those passive sales. So I find there's a sweet spot with Amazon ads, and every book and everyone's going to be different, but you can keep that on almost like as life support in the background, where you've got a bit of direct advertising on Amazon. Good place to do it. Should you do it if you just have a single book? I don't know anymore, because it used to be cheaper and now it's much more expensive. I do think if you're launching a new book, the first month, if you're advertising on AMS, that first month can be really, really powerful. I remember with Ascendant, something like 40 to 50% of its Kindle Unlimited page reads seem to come from the ads alone in that first month. But after that first month, the results really cliff face. So it's like really powerful for that first month if it's a good book that's in, that's selling well already. And then after that first month, even if the book's still selling well, the Amazon ads system just kind of goes, that's old. That's an old book now. Spits it out kind of and puts it down into backlist territory or something. So I still think it's worth trying the first month to get some traction. But after that, you want to be a little more careful of how much you're spending and think, is it worth keeping this on just the one book? Or am I willing to loss lead on this one to build, on the sequels? These are all things that everyone's going to have to work out themselves. But yeah, AMS does work. So on you go. I know you want to jump in.
No, I do. Well, actually, that's that leads in really nicely, because I think the sexy question that everyone's really wants to know is, how much do you make? Yeah. So I would be curious to rephrase that as, what did you make in your first year as a writer compared to what you're making now? Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, look at the potential. It's like, where do you start more realistically?
Well, Dragon's Blade Book 1, it didn't set the world on fire. So let's be blunt. So if your book does well, you'll find every so often someone's first book just does really well, and so that's going to be a very different story from me. I do think the more typical story is this, which is your first book comes out. I think that first year it sold 6,000 copies, but a lot of them were discounted because there was a BookBub deal. I can't remember what I made. It wasn't very much, barely anything. The first year that I started it was like barely anything, just going up in increments for the first 3 years until late 2018 when I put the box set out, and the box set just blew up and got to number 94 in the whole of Amazon. When it got to 94 in the entire store, that's the entire store, every possible category. I switched it from 99 cents to $2.99 to try and suck up a little more money whilst it peaked. And it went from the years went from looking like almost nothing, and then jumped to like £90,000 in that year. All the way through now. So yeah, you can be making very little, and then you get your big break, and suddenly it kind of explodes up. And there'll be everything in between that. Some people's first books will do a lot better than mine, and then they'll build it up slowly from there. They won't necessarily have that explosion, but it will build up even steadier. But since then, 2018, thankfully, everything has just built up. Each year has got better and better than the last. You have to kind of keep at it for a while, because it could take 3 or 4 years potentially. You might not be one of those people that comes storming out of the gates, but if you can break through and you start to get a bit of traction, it can then just start snowballing and building and building. So 2022 was an interesting year because I didn't put a book out in 2022, but I still made about £300,000 in revenue for the business. Most of that's profit by now because a lot of my ad spend has come down really low. This year, but as I put the find out, it's going to be much higher, like I'm not sure where we'll end up yet because the financial year and calendar year are different things, but we're looking at profits of north of £400,000 profits, which is pretty crazy. Or so do your mental maths into dollars or whatever currency you're in. But that's what you can get, and people do a lot better than me as well. There's a lot of people out there that can do a heck of a lot better. Especially if you're writing romance, you can do a lot better. Those women break it in. Yeah, but I'm sort of unusual in that I have relatively few books that earn quite a lot because I've kept my audio rights, and my audio book rights have become it's become my bread and butter. Most indie authors tend to sell their audio rights to a studio or to Audible, and I, through it's a whole story in itself. I've kept mine, and I was lucky enough that eventually that did find success. So when the success came in audio, I had the rights, and so I get a lot more out per sale than someone that has a contract with Podium, Tantor, or Audible itself, or any of these other studios. So because I've got all of my rights, I don't need to sell as many copies to make a bigger income. So
that's fantastic, because I understand that often if you're trying to, if you're starting out and you're trying to afford your first audiobook, you can sign a deal where they'll meet you halfway, but it means that they make more off the final product. So is that sort of how it works?
So if you start out and you don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to throw into an audiobook production, and your ebooks have succeeded well enough, you can definitely pitch to a studio. Oftentimes the studios will come to you because they're constantly crawling for more books. They're kind of in a war with each other to get all the content, So sometimes they'll come to you. If not, you can pitch to them. These days, you can also get an advance for this now. If you've done very well, you can fight for a bigger advance just for the audio. If you're kind of more early days, the advance will be kind of token, but that's money to you, and you're not out of pocket, and that's great. How it breaks down in terms of the unit sale, like what you will make per copy, is less than if you self-funded the production and self-published it. But it's not as massive as it might be. It might be in some cases a third, or if you get a slightly higher royalty rate, eventually it might be like a half. This is partly because the studios have special accounts with Audible, and they get higher payouts than I do, which I think is outrageous, but there you go. So they get a higher payout per sale to start with. So though you're getting a percentage of a percentage, the kind of it's not as awful as it could be. Of course, the thing is, I still, one sale for me is probably about 3 times more than what you'll get. Probably. It depends. It depends a little bit, but so. If you do find success in audio through a studio, you would have made more doing it yourself. But you've got to know where you start. Funding an audiobook production is probably the most expensive thing out there, unless you go for a crazy cover or something. And it's totally reasonable that when you're starting out to try to pitch to a studio, because you don't want to spend all that money for it not to work. If for some reason you have lots of money lying about, if you've worked in consultancy or lawyering or banking or something, and you've got lots of money and you just want to blow that into your new career as an author, go ahead, because it's just it's a question of bigger risk, bigger reward, right? If you take that risk and it works, it's a lot. You'll get a lot more back for it, and I found that luckily that's happened with me. But of course, if it doesn't work, you've sunk thousands into the book, and if it doesn't sell, well, that's kind of that. So yeah, I think if you're starting out, it's absolutely fine to sell that first series to a studio. But eventually, if you do find success, I would consider self-publishing your audio if you can. Don't just give your next series to them sort of willy-nilly. Either fight for a higher advance like you would with a traditional publisher, because you're dealing with a big publishing entity, right? If you're selling your audiobook rights, you're effectively becoming a hybrid author where you are self-publishing your ebook and you're selling your audio to a big publisher, and these guys are so big that they might as well be part of the big 5, right? So that they have that kind of, they're just that big. They have all those titles. understand how much your rights will be worth, try to push for more if you want to keep selling it to them, or consider, hey, I found the success, I'll go off and do my next series on my own. I'll take that money that I've made and invest it into becoming, fully self-published, and hopefully that'll work out even better. I would not be living the life I'm leading if my audio was with a studio or someone else, because my audio income would be cut in either half or third, and it is the biggest chunk of my income. And it's really nice to know that then anything that I do, any kind of marketing, any kind of advertising, any sale from any format, I get the full whack. Because I think what I would feel annoyed about is if I was doing an interview like this, or sending out review copies to booktubers, or paying for some advertising on Amazon or wherever else, and someone picks up the audiobook, but the lion's share goes to a studio. I'm thinking, why am I spending money, for them to benefit? Whereas when you have it all yourself, everything that you do, you don't care what format people buy, because it's all yours. And that's a really nice place to be. It makes me much more bolder with sending out lots of books to reviewers, sending out and paying for some YouTube sponsorships and experiments with like larger scale stuff, because it will all benefit me. And it's worth thinking about, because if you're slaving away and it's your audio that takes off, you're like, well, would it have been better for the ebook to take off, right? It's worth thinking about, for sure. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, I'm just going to segue a little bit away from, we've done a bit on indie publishing. I'm going to put a question to the, take a question from the audience, actually. I'm not sure if you can see that one that I just put through. But Story Kisser has written, Ascendant is one of my favorite books. I recommend your books all the time. And their question is, how much do you plan before you start writing?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I mean, word of mouth is the golden ticket. It's still the best way to sell books. So thank you very much for that. Before I start, I do plan. I always said I was a planner. I think in the past I was more 50-50. Defiant was so big and so much more complicated than the previous books, and it was also, I was, in real life we were buying a house and sorting a wedding, so there was a lot of things distracting in real life as well. But Defiant being so big, I had to start planning in even more depth than before. So for book 4, I've learned that lesson now. So for book 4, my planning document, which contains world building as well as actual plot, but that document was like 50,000 plus words before I started writing book 4. Just of like, here's the plot, here's the story, here's some chapter ideas and how it will run. This is the motivations, this is where we are, this is notes from the previous books, this is lore and world building and new stuff. So there's a lot in that document, and it's always growing, but quite a lot of planning. And I need that. I need that now, because there's so many interweaving plot lines, there's so much foreshadowing I have to set up. All that has to be there. But each of those chapters will still be kind of roughly planned. So when I get to a new chapter, rather than just diving in and writing it, I will sit there, I'll take a day sometimes and plan the entire chapter out. Noting the whole way through, this scene to this scene to this scene, this is all the information I need in this chapter, or this is what has to happen for the character arc, and really write it out, like, to myself, like, why is this happening? It's the stuff that won't get into the book, but this is happening here because the character is motivated by this. Remember, this is happening later, so you want to put this thing in, blah, 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 all the way down. And if I have all that to hand, it means when I actually come to write the chapter, it tends to come out a lot quicker. Whereas in the past, I had all that kind of in my head, but I didn't explicitly write it on the page first. So it was a lot more painful to kind of extract that straight into prose. So just having it there. Sometimes I have like unformatted dialogue, like stream of consciousness stuff that I splurge down. And then that's kind of like the 0th draft of a chapter. And then the actual first draft of a chapter will be sort of knitting all of that up in prose, So I plan a heck of a lot more now than I used to. I think it really helps me. I do garden. We talk about plotters and gardeners. I do garden as I go. Ideas will come to me. But if anything like that happens, I go back to the plan and I adjust the plan so that, so I allow the plan to be adjusted, but I need that. Without that, I'd be completely floundering, especially with these really big 200,000 plus word books. I couldn't just wing that.
That's interesting. This sounds a bit more thorough than I would have expected. That's really cool. I want to go a little bit deeper into looking at Songs of Chaos. So this is probably a very obvious question, I think, but what made you decide to go with Dragon Riders?
Let's see. So this was 2018. I started to think about this for the first time. There's actually a book in between Dragon's Blade and Songs of Chaos called Battlespire, which is this like RPG standalone book. So I'd already written that. That was in the tank. And then at late 2018, I was starting to think about the next fantasy series. At that point, I was talking to some people around me, my friends, town especially. We were just like, why hasn't there been? When did Inheritance, the Aragon series Inheritance ended? I want to say 2010. It might be 2011. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah.
And we were just like, how come there wasn't ever another one of those? Like, even at the time, through all the noughties, and it was just like there was that one Dragon Rider story, and publishing was like, well, we've got our one story for that now, so that's that done. I was like, why hasn't there been a follow-up? I know Temeraire came out, but Temeraire is not kind of the same. It's Napoleonic. It's not quite the same flavor. It just seemed like there'd been a bit of a gap. But what I noticed online was there was lots of indie writers putting out Dragon Rider books, and they seemed to be doing quite well. Like there seemed to be a bit of an audience for it. I had at the time I'd felt a little burned by Dragon's Blade to some extent because it was a slightly unusual concept. It wasn't an obvious sell. It was a little more difficult to sell. Some people refused to buy it because it had the word dragon in the title, so they were like, boring. Done that, a million times. But those people would probably have liked it because there's lots of twists and plays on it and stuff like that. And then the people that wanted a really straightforward dragon story didn't get that. So it was a little bit of a muddled thing. And I thought, all right, okay, right. I'll take my lesson. We'll make something that's much more obvious, much more down the line, but I'll do my spins on it. So it just seemed like there was a gap. It seemed like there was an audience on Amazon that was really hungry for it. I would be writing knowing that there was still a market there. We hadn't had a big Dragon Rider epic in a long time. I loved Aragon growing up, but there was bits about it that I thought, especially about every Dragon Rider story, that it just doesn't really make sense. I kind of want to do my own spin on it. So it was a little bit of being a little bit commercially minded, knowing that there was an audience out there who should get into it, and that was a good thing to know because by that point I was full-time writing. The last thing you want to do is shoot yourself in the foot by chasing something that's maybe a little bit too niche. I don't mind saying that. I don't mind saying that it was commercially minded because I need to find the Venn diagram where what I'm happy to write intersects with what people might want to buy. That's the happy sweet spot because you can do anything you like. With songs, I've done so much stuff that I would want to do in a book. It just has that nice audience that was waiting for it, and so I went for that. And I guess that's the why Dragon Riding. Yeah, there's an audience.
Yeah.
There'll always be an audience, and we hadn't had one for a long time. We hadn't had one that had done really well, and I picked away those Amazon, the indie titles, these other ones, and I was like, none of these are really hitting the mark for me at all. Like it just wasn't. I wasn't being satisfied at all by it. I felt like this is rushed. This isn't good enough. I'm gonna try it my way, which it could have flopped out. It could have been terrible, but I think a lot of writers are like that. You don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. It's just I'm going to do this thing that has been done, but I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to make it mine.
Yeah. Well, we've had a few more questions come from the audience. So one question is, are there any tropes that you enjoy reading, but you would never write?
That I enjoy, but I don't think I'd write. I don't know. I think if I don't enjoy the trope, I wouldn't write it. If I like the trope, I will write it, but I will do my thing with it. So I don't like chosen ones at all. I don't think it adds anything. I don't think it adds anything to the story that this person is absolutely predestined to do a thing. Because I think your main character will often, by nature of them being the main character, will be doing the thing. And I think it's more interesting that they have a choice not to do the thing. and they do it. Like, did it add anything to Harry Potter that there was a prophecy? I don't think so. Like, Harry was going to fight Voldemort anyway.
Yeah, like he already had motivation. He killed his parents. That worked. But yeah.
Yes, I don't think the prophecy added anything. I think
on tropes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just this is not actually answering the question, but just like one trope I particularly hate is the love at first sight trope.
Whoa, okay.
Because any sort of like the true love thing where they just like, oh, for convenience sake, we need them to like each other, so it's just going to be instantaneous, or it's going to be like, it happens a lot in fae romances in particular, where like, oh, you're my special mate and bonded from destiny, and it's like, no, that's not how romance works. But it's also
like, what was it in Twilight with the wolves? They like,
imprint, yeah, and that got really cringe.
No, I mean, but that's the thing. I don't like insta love stuff because it's not real. It's not real, and it doesn't. If it's insta love, I'm like, okay, well, all right. Where's the story there? They're instantaneously in love. I mean, I guess the story would be something else, but I don't enjoy that trope, so I wouldn't write it. So I'm trying to think if one comes to me, I'll bring it up. But I think most tropes that I enjoy, I will work with. But I will just maybe freshen up or my own little spin, or just the fact that you go off in a slightly different direction means it will be different. You can play with it, and you can drill down to the heart of it, right? Kind of like talking about what makes the Dragon Rider idea, that trope, so special. It's the idea that you bond to this dragon, which is awesome. It's like a super pet, right? I guess the fantasy is like you have a super pet dragon that's like, who wouldn't want that? It's really cool. You get to fly around, you get magic. It's kind of a reason why it always is a Dragon Rider thing. So the bond has to be really special, but I drill right down into that. It's the bond and the relationship that's so special. If you make that work really well, mechanically in the world and also just between the characters, then you're really going to set it. If you just make a Dragon Rider story and you muck that, you play around with that, or the bond isn't special, you might be like, this isn't feeling right. I think you can find the heart of any trope, like what makes it work, like what's it fundamentally doing, and you can change a lot of the trappings on top, but have the same satisfying psychological effect in the storytelling. So,
and I actually really liked the way that you had that juxtaposition between Holt and Ash having a very true friendship bond, and a lot of the other Dragon Riders having more of a professional contract, where it was more like they were, they were roommates. Not any sort of like romantic couple, for example, And I liked that so many of them, it was just a business transaction and it meant nothing to them. And it was really more about the prestige that came with it. And having that actually really realistic depicted really added a lot to the core Holt and Ash relationship, because you saw that for them it was real.
Holt and Ash are special for a bunch of reasons. But if you don't show that that's special, like, if everyone else had a super duper best friends relationship with the dragon, it wouldn't be as special to have this super duper best friends relationship. So, yeah. Everything else in the world gets sacrificed to make the main story work. It's kind of how you're building.
That's how you write it. It's good.
Yes. Yeah.
We got another question here. Sorry. So when a story idea began, actually, sorry, I would find the original one. Oh, sorry. When your story idea began, did you start with the world building? And when writing the story, did you, when you were writing it, did you start with the beginning and middle and end, or did you write it out of order in any way? So I think there might be two
questions. Do I begin with the world? I think this is, so do I begin with the world building? No, I begin usually always with the characters. So like with Dragon's Blade, it was always the character of Don-Ur. That's what I said. That's the only thing that stuck. And that kind of canvas of his history and his conflict, and everything else builds around that. And I think the same with Songs of Chaos. It was like, okay, I want to do a Dragon Rider epic. My dragon's going to be blind. We're not doing a farm boy. We're going to do a kitchen boy who's upset, who likes cooking, because I want to bring in cooking magic for this, play around with that as well. Okay, that's my characters. So now now how do we build the world to service their story, right? So that's how you get the other Dragon Riders who bond later in life, who have a more professional relationship. Sometimes a not very healthy relationship. Sometimes it's about, as you say, power or prestige or various other things. It's not about them bonding for purely friendship's sake. If I'd started the other way around, I think if I'd built a world that was, okay, Dragon Riders have to fight the big zombie bug armies of the Scourge. If I built that out, then tried to put Halt and Ash into that, it might have, the whole thing might have come out differently, because I might have built a world that was sort of very logically sound. Like, how would you combat the Scourge perfectly, sort of thing. Whereas when I build that out from the characters, it's like there can be a lot of, the world can be a little imperfect, as it should be, but it can be imperfect because I'm trying to contrast everything with the main duo. Like you've got conflict internally with characters, and you've also got conflict where the character is working against the grain of the setting they're in. You know, like you kind of want a bit of everything, I think, to make something really shine. So if the characters breeze through the world building setting and the societies too easily, it's something feels a bit weird with that, right? So Halt and Ash don't. They are scorned at every turn by everyone for all kinds of reasons. But you know, if Halt had taken the egg at the start and saved it, and then people giving them a pat on the back, it just wouldn't be the same. Right? Everything kind of builds outwards from them. Everything's about servicing that duo. When the other POVs come in, I then start to think about that. But the whole world gets built from the main character first for me, and outwards.
That's awesome.
In terms of writing, I typically write chronologically. The only time I jump about is sometimes in the like an Unbound and Defiant and Book 4 now, because I've got more POVs. Sometimes I run forward with one POV for longer and then backtrack and do the other ones. But I don't typically jump really out of order, writing scenes out of order, because I feel like I need that sense of I know what's come before to really finish whatever climax there might be. I wouldn't be able to write the climax first and then kind of write to it. I kind of have to have the whole build up myself, because then I'm going through the whole journey with them to the end. So it helps me kind of feel the journey as much as anything else.
Yeah, I've heard of some authors who do write out of order. If you've ever heard of the book Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell,
it's like one of my favorite books ever.
Yeah, yes, because I know that author, whose name I'm forgetting now. Is it Susanna Clark?
Susanna Clark.
Okay, yes. So she spent 10 years writing that book, and I know she wrote chapters, then each chapter was a short story, and then she nearly abandoned the product because she couldn't figure out how to get them into a chronological book form. And she actually had to bring an editor in to be like, okay, here's your story, here are some gaps you got to fill. And that's what actually turned it into a novel. But yeah, I couldn't imagine doing that. That would drive me crazy.
No, that's not for me. I gotta start and go forward. There have been times where occasionally I'll write a scene out of order, but it's rare. And oftentimes once I catch up to that scene, it then kind of gets quite heavily changed and fleshed out because of the whole build up to it. That I know I'm better just to kind of keep pushing forward chronologically for the most part. Yeah. With any POV. So I could write all of a POV and then go stop, that's done, and then go write another one. But I wouldn't jump around within a POV.
Yeah, I get that. Well, let's talk magic, actually. So you've put a lot of effort into inventing a pretty unique magic system. And I guess my question is, how did you make sure that it was unique? Because there are a lot of magic systems out there, but this one felt different. Like, were you deliberately trying to make it different, or was that just like a happy coincidence?
You're always trying to make it a little different, but you don't want to necessarily, like, I don't mind just having ideas that have been done, but either improving elements of them or doing it in a way that would suit me better or what I would have liked to have seen. I think what made Songs unique in terms of its core magic system between the dragons and the riders was that nuisance that always bothered me for a lot of Dragon Rider stories, every single one. I did not understand why the dragons would bond with a human. I was like, why? Why? What's in it for the dragon? Friendship? Is that it? Just the power of friendship? It seems really unnatural. I'm like, big, powerful race of creatures is probably not going to bond with lesser races necessarily, unless there's a really good reason to. Why bond with a human to give them magic when you've got all your magic? Like what benefit is it to you? so setting up the how the bond works. So the rider and the dragon bond. The bond is like a link between their souls. So the rider can pull magic out of the dragon's core. Good for the rider because now they have access to magic. But why does the dragons need this? Why don't the dragons themselves just fight the scourge? Why would you need the rider in the first place? It's because the rider can perform certain special meditations to cleanse impurities out of the dragon's core that improves its purity and its density, and then they can forge more power into the core in an active process that grows the dragon's power much faster. So a dragon in the order that has a rider will be a lot more powerful than their wild equivalent over any given time span. So a dragon rider that reaches Lord or Paragon, as you know, as we see, can go toe to toe with elder dragons, which you shouldn't be able to do necessarily. A sort of generic dragon rider could take on several wild dragons in terms of magic power easily because they're just much more powerful, because of the rider. So that felt like it's maybe a little blunt, it's maybe imperfect, but it felt like, okay, that seems rational that dragons would then bond, and if you were facing this existential threat, you need more power. So we'll do that. They kind of begrudgingly do it at first as well in the lore. What was the whole magic system? But the magic system was developing. It took me a while to really nail it. Initially, I was thinking it was all going to be about the dragon's song itself, and somehow it was going to be a bit softer and ethereal and more floaty. But I still had the power coming over the bond, and I still had the cleansing and the forging. I had all that kind of there, and I knew I wanted certain abilities to be quite specific. I was playing around with all that. It was there, but it was a little bit mushy. And then I started reading Cradle by Will White, which is a really big indie series. I think you've read it, or you've read bits of it.
Yeah, actually, I finished it just 2 weeks ago.
All right. So
it's meant to be next week's video, but I'll get to it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, for anyone that hasn't read Cradle, if you're out there and you still haven't read it, then that's it. So the martial arts magic in that has every character has their own internal magic core, and they perform meditations with it, and they can do certain abilities and things like that. And it was just reading that, I was kind of like, this is kind of what I'm doing, but like refined. So I was able to clarify what a lot of what I was writing after reading a few of those Cradle books. So it was like I was vaguely going towards something similar, but it was just a bit rougher on the edges. So I was able to clarify some of the terminology. So like the dragons now had cores. The dragon song got relegated to something that is just there in the background, but that isn't like something you specifically pull upon. So it was kind of like a balancing act of taking. So I was almost there, and then I read Cradle. I was like, that's really good. That progression system and stuff that comes through progression fantasy works really well. It feels like what I'm already writing. So I can refine that and drill it down. So I think it's a unique system for a Dragon Rider story, but it is based off of systems that are in many progression fantasy novels. But in most progression fantasy novels, it's the character themselves that have the core and they work on that. Whereas this one is about the sharing of the burden between the two characters who are bonded, which is a little different. So it has a nice spin no matter whether you're reading this on its own or as a progression fantasy. But we also have cooking magic. We've got blacksmithing magic. Yeah, put a lot of magic in. Yeah.
Well, that actually leads me to let's talk about blacksmithing magic, because there's a pretty significant blacksmithing portion of is it Unbound? Yeah. So how much of that is real?
Quite a bit's real. There's two big scenes in Defiant as well, isn't there? And those are some of my favorite scenes to write. Actually, you'd think, a scene of someone just smithing a sword. I'm like, no, it's where you get a lot of character work done. It's really great. So that developed. I was doing quite a bit of research, and I have a friend who's a fellow author called Jonathan Smith, and he is a blacksmith. Not like a master smith, but he does a lot of blacksmithing. He knows what he's doing. So I was doing a lot of this research and asking him all these questions and trying to figure out a system, because I quite like it when there's some real world truth to the magic, and then you just put a little bit of magic on top of it. so that it feels more grounded in. So the blacksmithing in the series, the magic system for the blacksmithing is when the riders make their weapons. They usually make a sword, but they could make a spear, they could make a hammer, they could make whatever they want, but they generally make swords. So how do we make magic swords that don't just feel goofy and, you know, like they just sort of craft it out of nothing? I wanted to show that, but that'd be a really interesting bit of reality for the riders and what they go through. So there's two systems at play. So if you want really high quality steel, it's theorized that like this is something that the Vikings might have done, or certain segments of the Vikings might have done, a crucible method where it gets the steel really high quality through really old school techniques where like people are pulling on bellows for 8 hours, 9 hours to keep the fire hot and stuff like this, and it takes a really long time. But the process that you see in Ascendant, where they put all the stuff into the pot and then they heat it up and they bring the ingot out, and the ingot is really high quality steel, is kind of what some people theorize some of the Vikings might have used. And that's why their steel was stronger than other people's steel. So that's where you can get in history, you might hear, like if there's legends of swords that are stronger than other swords, it's because if you've got a really high quality steel sword, it can actually cut through a really low quality iron sword or something like that, right? If you're just using an iron sword and a really good steel sword that can really chop, it can actually cut through the iron.
So like in Kill Bill.
Yeah. You don't, so like you can be like, oh yeah, you could see how in history someone might think that sword's magic. It's like, it says no, it's just really good steel. So if you have that really good steel, so it's like not pure steel, but just really high quality steel. But there's also this misconception that I had this misconception. I thought, well, what about those steel swords that where the metal has all those nice ripples? You know, like we call it Damascus steel sometimes. The katana is like a lot of Japanese steel looks like this, where there's all those ripples and layers through the sword. You're like, does that make it better? Because in A Song of Ice and Fire, they say to make the Valyrian steel, it's folded and folded and folded and folded. So like there's a bit of a popular, I think, a misconception that the folding makes it stronger somehow. That's true if you work with poor quality steel to begin with. So if your steel is low quality, if you fold it a lot, you'll hammer out some of the impurities, and that will make it better. And then the ripples are just the effect of the layering by folding it constantly. So you can make it better, but if you just had really great steel at the start, you wouldn't have to fold it. And if you fold, if you have really great steel and you fold it and fold it and fold it, all you will do eventually is knock out the carbon, which will make it low quality because you're knocking out the carbon molecule, which bonds to the iron, which actually makes it steel in the first place. And when I realized that was the light bulb moment. I was like, okay, so they will make really high quality steel. They will then keep folding it on purpose to knock out the carbon. And when the carbon molecules get knocked out from all the heating and all the fire and all the hammering, remember, riders are also really strong. So these guys are just slamming the hammer down, like they can really go at it. Knocking all that out, they replace the carbon with the motes, the little raw motes of their magic, and they shove it. And under the hammer and all the folding, that folds in, so the magic seeps in to take place. The carbon binds with the iron, and now you've got magic steel because you've kind of done the whole. You've done it differently, right? And then I was like, oh, that feels really good. It's like you're taking two processes that are real, and then it's just a little bit on top is the magic. And because whenever you fold, all the folding and all the heating and all, so it takes a long time to make the good steel in the first place, and then all the folding takes a long time. And then even in real life, it can snap. All the folding, you can actually break the steel as you fold it. So it just seemed like it was just one of those like light bulb moments where I thought, that's it, it's nailed. Because you can have the character working at this piece of metal for hours and hours and days and days and days. And it can be a really brutal method. They can fail because the steel can break. If they fail, they have to start again. So there's like there's failure involved. It's like a rite of passage. You know, they're sweating there. They're spending time with their dragon. Like you can get a lot. This seemed like a ripe field to have character work. And so yeah, in book 2, my favorite scene is when a certain character makes his axes in book 2, and the scenes in Defiant where Holt is forging in 2 scenes are also some of my favorite scenes. I just think I just think for me it came together really well, and I'm abnormally proud of it. I don't know if anyone else cares, but I really like it.
Yeah.
I wish I saw it in reviews more. People are like, oh, the book's great. I'm like, tell me, did you like the blacksmith? Yeah, I just did so much research, but I feel like it came out really well. It wasn't like I was sort of dumping it in because it all mattered. It all mattered that all those scenes, yes, all the smithing is there, but it's also about all the character work that happens with the scenes. So I feel like I was justified. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a reader, when I was reading that scene, I was impressed by the realism of the blacksmithing, but my focus was very much on the character work, and the two worked together very well. I think it's what made it so enjoyable, because I think when you're a writer, you get things that motivate you that aren't always the same thing that impress the reader as much. So it's about finding that balance, and I think you absolutely did that. Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
You go. I'll read out another question in a second, but you go.
Sure. Well, I just think for me, finding a bit of reality like that with how the smithing works, like if I was just trying to write a scene where they make a sword, but I was kind of winging it and just fantasy winging it, it would come out feeling maybe a bit hodgepodge or a bit undercooked because the level of detail just isn't there. You know, I think doing, you don't want not every scene can be that, but I think you want to find the point that matters to your story or to what's happening in the world building, and go deep on something that it then makes everything else feel more fleshed out, even if it isn't. You know, you can go really deep in a couple of things, and that allows you to put a lot of reality into those scenes, which then, whenever I talk about something else, even if I'm not talking about it in the depth, you sort of feel like there's depth because there was so much depth in this other area.
That's great. Well, I'm just going to highlight this comment here by Babtim Creatives, there we go, which says, what advice would you give to a very young writer with no means of immediate money for the production of a book? And how would you go about promoting such a book?
Oh, okay. So, I mean, write your book. If you would like to try traditional, if that could be a route you would like, you might try getting an agent and submitting that way. Because I mean, that way, if it works out, you're not spending any money. If you're determined to self-publish for whatever reason, if that's what you want to do, I know it's going to sound a bit weird, but you need some money at least for like the cover. You know, you do need to get it proofread. Even if, I mean, you could outsource that to like a whole bunch of friends and family if they're willing, and you could crowdsource it so that enough people have read it that enough things get caught. But I would recommend getting some professional copy editing. It is it really tells if you haven't. But when it comes to the cover, it's really hard. You do need some money, but there's this like a sliding scale. There will be artists out there, graphic designers. If you go for a more graphic cover, where it's not like a new custom illustration, that's going to be a lot cheaper than getting custom made artwork. And your mileage is going to vary. So I think the illustrations work really well for the US market, but a graphic cover can certainly work as well, and they will be cheaper. So you could look to get a graphic designer to make a really nice cover where you just have like a really good font and some design and artwork around it. Oftentimes they'll just be taking stock imagery and manipulating it really well. Like you won't know it's kind of cobbled together from different sources. They're really good at what they do, but that will be a slightly cheaper route, and maybe that's a place to start. But then if your budget's still struggling and you publish it, don't worry about advertising. Don't put any money into Facebook. Don't put any money into Amazon. Just focus on trying to reach out to readers first of all. Actually, you can just give away some copies to readers. Find your spaces on Instagram or Goodreads or whatever. See if you can do a giveaway for the ebooks, because that's obviously free. You can let people know that you can just be honest with people and say, hey, I would love to send you a copy for review, or just to get your feedback, or I'll just give away a copy because I'm looking to build a readership. I don't have the budget yet to give out print books. Would you be willing to take an ebook? Just be upfront and honest with people about that. But just start small where you can. But don't spend money on ads. Do spend money on a cover and however way you can, and then just try and do it the really step-by-step way. Find readers, you've got Amazon. If you're in the Kindle, if you're in the exclusive system, you can drop your book to free for so many days each quarter. You could do that. You could do a 99 cents thing. Reach out to other people in your space, see if they want some review copies, readers and influencers. That's totally fine. Find other writers that are at your level, make friends with them, just get together, share. You can do joint promotions with each other where you pool your resources and pool your audiences together. In terms of the audio, just leave that, and hopefully if you build the success, you can then pitch the book to one of the studios, and if it's doing well, they'll buy it and you'll get some money from them from that, and you can then maybe invest that into other areas or just take it. Just start small, do it a little bit at a time. It's kind of hard to give specific advice because it really depends on the genre, right? And I only really know this space. I only really know epic fantasy and the quirks of that. If you're writing romance, there'll be different things that you can do and different ways that you can promote. But you don't need to spend money. You might also just put the book out if it's packaged really well, if the title's right and the blurb's right, it might just take off. Some of the most successful authors I know have never spent a single penny on advertising or marketing. No, like Will White hasn't spent any money. My friend Philip C. Quantrill hasn't spent any money. I know Michael J. Sullivan has never spent any money on direct advertising and marketing in that sense either. So if you just put out a great book that has a readership, so it's a commercial book and it's titled well and packaged well, you might get lucky. The algorithm might just pick you up and push you out to the stratosphere. That can happen. I mean, most of the selling is the algorithm. I mean, there's no denying it. All the effort that I do is like 20%. 80% is it's in the algorithm going out to the right people. The fact that I get the sales over time is largely due to that. All the efforts that I do help to keep it visible and keep it afloat. But I'm under no illusion that if I could sort of do nothing. I could do lots more, and it might not affect that as well. So, you can get lucky in quotes by just putting out a really great book that's in the right genre space and it's packaged really well. I hope that's an okay answer. It's hard to know without knowing the specifics and the context of like that situation. It would be difficult, but there's always ways that you can go about doing things without having to drop lots of money.
That's fantastic. Actually, I thought that covered all the things I would have said. Actually, so I've got nothing else to add. Really cool. Well, I will get back to my questions. So we're sort of near the end of my list of questions. I wanted to talk about the Scourge. So your bug monsters and the army of the undead. They're terrifying. So what made you go that intense in a funny way? Because I think a lot of your stuff is, I'd almost say kid-friendly without being childish, So the Scourge are about the most intense thing you've got. So what made you want to push it that far?
I think if you've got dragons on one side, the thing on the other side better be bloody terrifying. Like if dragons if dragons have to fear a thing, it has to be really scary, right? It can, they're not, even if the dragon is not the bravest dragon, it's still a dragon. Like you think about what would scare a lion or what would scare a Tyrannosaurus Rex or something, like the sort of big animals, the king predators, what's going to scare them? So you have to I think I had to make something pretty gnarly, pretty horrifying, even if sort of fight the dragon is still feeling pretty confident. It's just the scale of the swarms and it's the scale of the, how they obviously the zombie bugs don't feel pain, and they just march on. I think it was that. If you're going to set up something to fight dragon riders, better be pretty horrible, better be pretty scary, tough stuff. Elsewise, it's not going to feel like there's a challenge. The whole thing won't feel like it's holding up, So that was it, yeah. And it's a whole mashup of different things. It's a mashup of like the Scourge from World of Warcraft, from the Undead. It's a mashup of the Darkspawn from Dragon Age, and they function sort of like the Darkspawn with the whole underground tunnels and things like that. And then, big zombie bugs. Why not? Because I was also thinking of, okay, if you're fighting dragon riders, you need to have something that can also fly. You want ground forces. You also want stuff that can fly. So horribly huge, powerful insects felt kind of. I mean, I don't like them. I mean, I also hate wasps. I hate wasps so much. So I made scourge wasps, so I could have dragons barbecuing them on a daily basis. If a wasp that large was attacking, I wet myself. I think I hate them. So yeah, just trying to think about the mechanics of how you would build an enemy to fight dragon riders, because there's lots of riders in this story. That's something I noticed with a lot of sort of other some dragon rider stories, not all, but you get two types. There's the type where it's the Dragon Rider Academy school, and there's lots of them, and they're training. And then there's the type of like the Aragon, there are no more Dragon Riders, and there's only one left, and this is the last one. And it's kind of, when it's the last one, your enemy doesn't need to be as crazy because there's just one of you. But if you've got hundreds of Dragon Riders still in your world, and there's like a whole system, and they're quite institutionalized and organized, yeah, you've got to challenge them. Otherwise, well, yeah, it's not going to, the stakes aren't going to be there.
That's true, actually, because I think there's a lot of dragon versus other dragon. And it's one of those things where it's like, it's cool and epic, but it's hard to really measure how difficult the battle's actually going to be because the concept is so foreign. So it's just like, it's one of those things where it's like magic, and the cost of the magic is effort. So it's like you have just enough magic before you run out of effort and strength, and it's like that's what a dragon battle is. It's kind of like a vague power level. But yeah, true. And I hadn't considered that the Scourge, like, they're not just there for the shock factor. They actually fulfill a specific function in the story of being a worthy foe of the dragons.
Yeah, have that. I think you're right with it's probably why I've avoided having a lot of Dragon Rider on Dragon Rider fighting until later in the series, or at least the sky battles, because it's just like, it's really hard to kind of grasp what that would be like. It's kind of hard to follow in the written form. So I shy away from that a little bit. Not in book 4, shit's kicking off in book 4, but yeah, you set up that big enemy, but then I try to keep the battles a bit more like 1-to-1 almost, or it's just Hall and Ash versus a group here, or one rider there, or something to kind of keep it a little bit more containable, so you can actually understand what's happening.
That's good. One of the themes that I really love in Songs of Chaos is the reoccurring theme of failure. So a lot of plot lines end in failure, like you mentioned with the swords breaking when you're trying to build them. But failure is a tough thing to include in a story, but there's a lot of it in songs. So I guess my question is, was that a deliberate decision? Is that something that you thought would make a good story, or is that more of a personal belief, if you will?
Yeah, I wish I had a really structured answer for that. I think it probably comes down to just the gut instinct thing a little bit, but partly knowing I was going to build it out to a 5-book or 6-book series. You can't have them succeed too easily all the time, otherwise it's just going to get a bit unbelievable. Like, again, it's about stakes and tension, and if they succeed in book 1 and then succeed in book 2, and then it's kind of like thinking of longer series like that, where in Order of the Phoenix and Harry Potter, like at the end of that they go get that prophecy and everything, so they kind of succeed but kind of fail. Sirius dies, they don't just win. There's a lot of cost. There's a lot that costs them in the success, which I think is probably useful for a long series, because it builds that tension and the reality and the stakes. Because thinking if I stop for a minute and try and think what living in this world would be like, it would be horrifying. It would be terrifying and scary. You would be living in fear a lot of all the Scourge, and there would be so much death and destruction constantly that I can kind of see why the societies have built the way they do. But I think it's that sense of like the successes that will come will always feel stronger when they have had the failure initially. It's like try fail. There's like a structure in storytelling of the try fail cycle. Like you try, you fail, try, you fail, you try, you succeed. sort of like a three parts or however many parts you want to put in it. If they succeed in the first go, you'll be like, okay, well then what? If they see the characters struggle with everything. And I think the fact that the heroes fail, they don't often fail so outright that like it wasn't worth them trying. It's just usually sometimes it's a Pyrrhic victory, sometimes it comes at a great cost. Sometimes they do get sometimes they have failed and then they kind of do what they can to mitigate the damages, but it also makes the villains, whether it's the Scourge itself or other villains and antagonists in the series, that they actually have agency and impact as well. Because if a new antagonist pops up and they bonk them on the head, again, it won't feel that satisfying. But if the antagonists are actually a threat, like what made Thanos such a good antagonist is because they failed in Infinity War and he succeeded. Then we had a different Thanos in the next movie, but that's sort of separate. But that's what made him such a good villain, because the Avengers don't fail. Oh, they did. Oh, Thanos is he's a real villain. Like, him getting his comeuppance is going to be really satisfying when it comes. And it made him really compelling villain, one of the most compelling that we've had on the big screen for that reason. Like, he actually succeeded. So you know not to mess with him, because there's that bit at the back of your head with a lot of villains where it's like, well, you're not going to succeed, so why are we worrying about this? If you show that the competent antagonists is really powerful, almost more so than competent heroes. Because if the antagonist is a little incompetent or doesn't succeed, it's not worth the conflict. It's not worth fighting them. I think you have to put that failure in to really seed that.
That's interesting.
I think that's me rationalizing it after the fact, because in the books and the moments, I'm just sort of, this is how it's going to work. This feels right.
Yeah.
This feels right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So it's more like your writer's intuition kind of guides you in a funny way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, often if I have that idea of like, oh, this should happen in the plot, I will note to myself why I think that works. But where that spark comes from is just that instinct of like, they need to, it's going too well, they need that failure point or whatever it may be. I wish I could give examples, but I don't want to spoil stuff. So
yeah, it's a tricky one. Hey.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here's a cool question. Sorry, it's silly, but I'm proud of this question. But it's simply, what are you most proud of everything that they've written, everything in your career? What's your biggest personal victory?
I think boiling it down, it's just such a, it's still kind of unbelievable that I've managed to find this success, and it is my job. But I think a lot of people that want to write do have that sense of it would be fantastic to be full-time writing. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And it's really hard. And even when people do complete books and they get, sometimes if they go the traditional route, they can get multiple contracts. They can go through many, many books before they get to full-time. If they ever do this, obviously there's no guarantee that would work. And many, many people self-publish and it doesn't necessarily work out. So I would say I'm proud, but that's the thing that I'm always like, I could talk about individual bits, but that's the happiest. That's the best thing about it. Like, I still can't believe it in some ways. Like, the fact that I got that break when I did, and then it's kind of built from there, is just still stunning when I think about the scope and the how unlikely it was. That I'm just so happy that I've been able to make it work, because I would not be very good working a regular job. It just wouldn't. I don't think that would suit me. Yeah. So very fortunate that it's become reality.
Wonderful. Well, I'm almost done with my questions. I've got like one more in the bank, but I do just want to put the offer out again. If anyone's sitting on a question, it doesn't have to be perfect. We do want to hear from you. This is a safe place to share. But if anyone else wants a question, by all means, speak now, forever hold your peace. My final question was simply, what's next? So what are you working on today at the moment?
I'm working on Songs of Chaos Book 4. As yet, I don't have a title because, like I say, those one-word titles are really hard to get the right first. But working on Songs of Chaos Book 4, I'm about 50,000 words into the draft, which is nice. No promises on when it'll be finished because, things happen, things get in the way. But hopefully it will be ready and released late next year. That's the plan. That's
really exciting, actually. I'll mark my calendar because I'm very invested at this point. Something I don't talk about, but when I read, I generally read series that are finished. I try to avoid series that are in the middle. But I'm glad I've done it with Songs of Chaos because it's good, but I'm not used to the waiting. And it's an unfamiliar, uncomfortable experience.
Well, it's good then. You can be there for the hype for when it actually comes, right? Part of it.
That's right. You bet I will be.
Part of the whole process. Yeah. Oh, don't worry. I'll let you know when it's ready.
Excellent. And you've mentioned a couple of times that 5 books is the magic number. How confident are you on that at this stage? Does it feel right? Or are you like 90%?
No, it'll be 5. It'll be 5.
Yeah. Okay.
It will be 5. I don't know like if they'll become longer than I thought. I'm trying to get the next 2 books to be shorter than Defiant because Defiant was really, really long.
It was a chunky one, wasn't it? Yeah.
It's 250,000 words published, but if you were to take the raw drafts, it was like 300,000 words. So I overwrote quite a lot, and then that takes time, and then you have to spend time editing all that down. So there was a lot of time. Because it's a very difficult book, but there's a lot of time sort of needlessly spent overwriting and then editing. And so I'm hoping that not only will these next 2 books be shorter, but I won't overwrite them as much. So hopefully they'll come out a bit quicker. But it might, who knows? It might be that the 5th book becomes a chonker to because I'm conscious of you'll have the climaxes and everything of the plots, but then you want to have a little bit of like the aftermath and where the characters end up and stuff like that. So we'll see how long it ends up. But I think definitely 5 books. Definitely 5 books.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, honestly, I think that wraps it up on my end because it is nearly midnight in Australia.
Thanks for staying up so late.
No, that's okay. Actually, it's a funny being in Australia. It is so hot at the moment. It's why I've shaved my beard as short as I can possibly wear it because I couldn't stand it on the face anymore. The hair stain, thank you. But, But yeah, we are cooking at the moment. Like it's nearly midnight, and confession, I've got the aircon running on cooling because it's just warm in my skin. It's just it's how it is these days.
Well, I'm jealous of the aircon because here in the UK we have no aircon, and in London every summer it's boiling. And you can't escape it anywhere. And I wish so at least you've got aircon. I'm jealous of that.
Yeah, well, in Australia, Australian summer is a little bit like I want to say like the Hulk when he's being controlled by Scarlet Witch.
Yeah. Okay.
Extra hulky, it's summer on steroids. So yeah, people it sounds like a joke, but people literally die if they don't have air conditioning. It's wild.
People are falling over here, and it's not even anywhere near as hot. It's dangerous. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Michael, I just want to thank you again so much for for everything, actually, for being available for conversation, for all our emails, and for chatting and answering people's questions. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. And I've loved reading all of your books, except Battlespire, which is on my radar at this point. But I'm very excited for what's coming up next. So I just want to thank you once again for joining us tonight. Today.
Oh, thanks. It's been a real midday here. So it's been great, man.
And thank you, Kit.
Hey, Kit.
It's been monitoring questions for everyone. So everyone, please thank Kit for her wonderful contribution tonight. And also for just generally, I don't know if anyone knows, but Kit is like my biggest cheerleader in my life. Like she is just one big ball of encouragement for all of my hopes and dreams. So the book guy would be nothing without her, well and truly. So.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure being here, man. And I've loved all your videos. I think they're great. I think you offer something really unique in the booktube space. The deep dives are really helpful, and they always have a bit of insight that I had never thought about before, which is unusual, which is great. And so I think you're doing great work, and I was so happy to see the videos of my stuff go up. It was just something else, giving me a big smile. And so, yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for chatting, and good luck with the channel and good luck with your own writing. I'm really excited to see how that goes.
Yeah, I'll get back to that soon. Okay, well, thank you everyone who joined, and it's been a wonderful. Thank you for the people who put up some questions and just for commenting. Really appreciate it all. And I'll see you next time. Next time I put up a video, I guess that will be wonderful. All right, thank you so much, everyone. See you later.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.